Design Leader Insights is brought to you by Fuego UX. Fuego UX is a user experience consultancy focused on creating simple and intuitive digital experiences. Hey, Paul, thanks so much for joining the show today.
Thank you, Alex. I'm excited to be here.
Yeah, for sure. And as we get started, can you give the audience a little bit of context into your journey in UX?
Absolutely. So I started out after the dot-com crashed, but before the iPhone came out. So it was a very interesting time in like the early 2000s when everything was going digital. My early career, I worked in a few spots on a variety of things, from just kind of like branded experiences that were really serving marketing purposes, websites, interesting experiences on marketing sites. Frankly, through networking and a lot of luck, I got an opportunity to join Uber in like 2012, 2013, and was quickly made a manager. And that kind of started the next chapter of my career, which was working inside of technology companies and working on the design leadership side. I sort of left Uber in the way that a lot of us did towards the end of my career there, by not leaving the company, but going to Uber Eats, which was run as sort of an independent business, a startup within the startup. And got an opportunity to join a company called Open Door when they were fairly earlier in their journey. They're pre-IPO, about Series C, and a small design team, about 8 people. And I joined and helped grow that company, take them public. And most recently, I left Open Door almost a year ago at this point, and I joined another small startup, also in the real estate space, called Aalto. And we're on a mission to democratize real estate and help people go all the way through their real estate transaction when they're buying a home.
And Paul, it seems like B2C, I'd almost say like consumer staples, has been a theme throughout your career. What draws you to that? Like the logistics of transportation, food, housing, these essential consumer products.
I think I must find something fulfilling about being like, hey, anyone can use this, coming from, my background and coming up in the beginnings of the user experience movement. There was just this like feeling that like we're making things for people, we're making things more usable for people. It's all this human centeredness. So I wonder if like that's just always been something that I've gravitated towards, like being able to, do the most good for the most people with all the things I picked to work on.
You're going to have a lot of advice, but a question I always ask is, what advice do you have for new designers entering the field today?
I think the number one thing that seemed to be what helped me was just creating a lot. And I think that's maybe if I only gave one piece of advice to someone that's starting out in the career, it's like, you've got to get a lot of these reps in. Design is a practice. It's something you learn by doing. It's not something you can just study in a book and be like, okay, now I'm ready to go. Like, so actually just create a lot, and always be like making things, and that's going to get you probably 80% there of just doing it a lot and getting that practice in. Sort of related to that is working early to develop good creative habits. So design, again, it's a practice, and you need to be able to get into this flow state really quickly. And this is true of any creative work, whether you're doing, UX design, whether you're an author writing a novel, like having that good creative habit where you can kind of like get into the flow state and really start producing. That's an important fundamental skill to develop so that you can get there, you can get going, and you can get to those creative breakthroughs faster and in a more like repeatable way. And then the last thing, sort of reflecting on what worked for me, coming out of the earlier days, we had to build a lot of the things that we were designing ourselves. So I was often coding up the website that I was designing. I was often making the thing that I was creating to the actual production ready version of it. And so I think I learned a lot about sort of the more invisible aspects of, interaction in UX design from being accountable to actually make it work. So it's like, okay, learning about the underlying information architecture and, the states of things and the way things flow together. It's really helpful to like actually have to, take what you're designing and move out of just being like flat screen-based comps into something that's actually functional and working. And so that would be my last piece of advice for folks that are out there. Figure out a way to like, make some of the things that you're designing.
I love it. Some super practical, actually design focused advice. Let's talk about collaboration. Like design is not done in a silo. Over your career, how have you interacted with counterparts in different departments?
Yeah, I mean, for me, I started working in these agencies where we were specialists that either did just general like interactive design or, user experience design, like human-centered, highly usable, highly functional product design. And so we were always brought in as both the makers, but also kind of as a consultant. I learned early that it's not just about like, here it is later, right? You have to teach, sell, you have to package. And I think that really helped when I moved in-house and started at Uber, because when I started Uber, neither the industry nor frankly Uber had a really strong grounding in what actual, user experience design entailed and required. There was like some very old school thinking happening there, as was around the industry. And so there's always this sort of like tension and kind of maybe sometimes even animosity between like design versus whomever. And like, it's very easy to feel sort of deflated and like we're not getting the investment and that people are working against us. And there's certainly some truth to that. Yeah. We are only as good as our inputs, and everyone is designing to a certain degree and can frankly ruin design to a certain degree. What I've found is that rather than getting sort of pessimistic and whiny about that, it's worth asking like, well, why is that happening? And in my experience, I've never been in a situation with like a bad partner that wasn't setting design up for success, where that partner, whether they're eng, PM, an executive, a founder, whomever, I've never been in a situation where they weren't setting us up for success and they fully understood design. But that's not actually what the seat at the table is about or what it requires. It means that we need to be there to really help educate others on what design actually is. Most people don't know, or their definition is too narrow, and then help align with them on like, well, this is what we care about. This is what we require to achieve the things that we care about. Here's how the things that we care about match your goals, the goals of the business. All that's evangelizing, educating, and really working with these partners when you get that seat at the table. It's all about finding that win-win. It's like, I know what you're trying to drive. I know what your goals are. Let me help you understand how our goals are aligned in this way. Maybe it's a tweak. Maybe it's a little more time. Maybe it's a little more, a better brief. Maybe it's not such prescriptive direction, but then help them understand how that's going to get us better design, which is going to lead to better, whatever, conversion or better revenue.
Yeah.
And so a lot of that is really just coming down to education and evangelizing for folks.
Let's talk about one more thing that it seems like you've done in your career, which I think is tough for a lot of people. It's like leaving a big company where, I mean, nothing's guaranteed, but it seems like design's established. Maybe you feel stable, your role's stable, and then going to something new, unproven, smaller, maybe more exciting, but that's obviously scary too. What's the mindset for that?
For me, again, I think this goes back to my sort of upbringing in the industry. Everything was unestablished when I started. Right. I wasn't working with companies that are like, this company has a reputation for great design. This company didn't even have anything digital, right? It was like everything that I was making, that we were making in sort of those years was new. My mentality, and I think this comes from my early days, is always like, well, yeah, of course you want to go to the place that doesn't have anything, because that's where we come in to give them something. And a trend that I've seen, recently has been some of this, like, maybe it's a little risk aversion for designers to go into places that are unestablished. And there's like, flocking towards hey, this is the big established brand. This company is reputable for having great design, and I'm going to go there. And I've always found it kind of odd that there's not more sort of pull towards going to a company that's nobody's ever heard of before, so that you can establish design there, design the entirety of the first version of a product. That's the kind of stuff that's always appealed to me. And you can kind of see in my career moves, I've always been going back to that, because I also kind of look at it across like the entire industry as someone who feels kind of attached to this entire movement. I'm like, we need to give great design to all these companies. We don't need to just concentrate on a few that have already done it. We need to do it everywhere, because this is user-centered design. We're trying to create better design for people. That means everywhere. Whoever needs to use that product should have a great experience with that product. And like, it's not going to happen if they don't have great design, and they're not going to get great design if all the great designers are kind of clumped over in these like safe established
companies. Yeah, that's a great point. Well, Paul, thanks so much for joining the show today.
Thanks for having me. It's been a blast.
For sure.